Loki is Marvel's newest show on Disney Plus and follows, well, the amazing character of Loki from the other Marvel Cinematic Universe and follows the events after Avengers Endgame when the Avengers go back in time and Loki screws up the timeline, and this is set in the alternate timeline that he created in 2012. It follows him being taken to a place called the TVA where they keep variant timelines to keep what is so-called the sacred timeline in order to stop multiverses from colliding. I loved the idea of this show, and I really wanted to see Loki finally be given his glorious purpose on screen, because to me, all of his other appearances in the other films, even up to his, spoiler, death in Avengers Infinity War, I felt that the character of Loki, even though it was so engaging and interesting and villainous and anti-hero-wise and mischievous, every aspect of this character supremely interested me, and one thing that I never really felt come into his play was his arc in the end of Infinity War. Even though I loved what happened to him in the end of that film, I always felt like there was a piece of Loki missing. Like we didn't get to see his true arc. And here, Loki's character comes full fold, not just on the villainous side, but on the heroic side, and pretty much shows that it doesn't really matter what side, doesn't matter what destiny has bestowed you. And to be honest, this show fulfilled Loki's glorious purpose on screen, and I loved every single minute of it. This show completely floored me from its performances, its technical craft, its world building of fantasy and sci-fi, its side performances, everything in this show, and even all of its metaphorical aspects, all of its story aspects, and everything on a filmmaking side was truly some of the best MCU content I've ever seen, and I would love to talk through it, but I cannot speak about this show until I speak about spoilers. So if you have not seen every episode of Loki, I will be reviewing each one here and talking about the plot points. So if you don't know things about this show, then don't watch this review. But if you have seen the show, let's get talking about thoughts, and also make sure to comment down below your thoughts on this series as a whole. I'd love to know what other people think about it, because I thought the show was actually very necessary for Loki's story, and episode 1, right off the bat, showing us the events after that messed up timeline in Avengers Endgame, showed us Loki in a really interesting fashion. It added depth to his stuff, and basically the first episode was basically like this sci-fi world building of a piece of the MCU we haven't seen, but also a great character piece for Loki, really delving deep under the skin of this character and showing who he really is on the inside, and the fact that this villainous portrayal that he puts on is pretty much just a persona for him to feel stronger. I love the idea of this, and Loki has always been so attached to the stories of Thor, or Asgard, or the Avengers, and it was great seeing him just on his own. And I know technically there are other characters around him, but what I love so much about this episode is he gets to look back on his past, present, and future and see who he really is.
Trust me. Loki, I've studied almost every moment of your entire life. You've literally stabbed people in the back like 50 times. Why never do it again?
And we finally get to see as an audience who the character of Loki really is, and the fact that I've always thought that Loki isn't really a villain. I agree with Agent Mobius on this one, Owen Wilson's character, who was also great in the show, that Loki isn't really a villainous character. Loki just does villainous things that he doesn't enjoy because he feels like he needs to do them. And I love the idea that this show showed the narcissistic of Loki, but it also showed such the pure heart of him as well. And Tom Hiddleston relishes in this role. Oh my, he does some things with the character that I don't think was even intended, and even the humor. This show, yes, is very dramatic, very poignant, and very emotional, but it also shows the wacky fun that Loki can have as a character. All the crazy stuff that he can get up to is so exciting, and this understood how to balance those emotions in a really perfect way. And the first episode was perfect setup, and the second episode was basically like a thrilling, futuristic time travel mystery. I really loved it. It was really delved into the TVA and the world building behind it. I thought it introduced the variant of Loki in an interesting way. The fact that Loki has dealt with all these different aspects before, all the different areas of his character we've dealt with, but the one thing he hasn't dealt with yet is himself. And here he gets to actually reminisce with himself in another form, and maybe other versions of himself as well, future selves, but the main one is Sylvie, a female version of Loki, and they both live very different lives, have very different viewpoints, and I loved both of their characters a lot. And Sylvie, to me, was interesting from the moment. She was very villainous, but at the same time you understood that there was some dark areas of her past that the other Loki did not have, and I thought it was very interesting to see what her character had to bring to the table. And I love the strange meta imagery and meta behind all this story. The metaphorical stuff in this show is really interesting, especially involving the character in terms of looking at his destiny, but also everything looking the idea of free will, and Loki being a character who's someone who is actively always trying to take free will away from others by trying to rule. I thought that was really, really enjoyable, but what I loved most was the relationship between Loki and Sylvie, not only in their contrasts and differences with one another, but their relationship with one another in terms of an opposition side, when they're fighting one another and when they're against one another, and trying to learn more about one another as well to benefit themselves, but also in an aspect of romance, which I thought was really unique. There is no other romantic relationship that Loki could be part of other than himself. And I thought that was genius. It was so much fun to watch, but it also was very emotional. I really felt for these two characters, and they felt like different people. They felt like people who just forged together in a way, and seeing then at the end that actually all this was planned by someone else was actually very interesting. The third episode following them on their little side adventure was very sci-fi, very enjoyable, looked visually stunning, and the final shot of that looked marvelous. It was like this huge chase sequence that went on for so long, and it was great. What I then loved about episode 4 was all the shocks and surprises just sort of hit a halt. I had an issue with the end credit scene, the fact that the episode left me on such a shock in episode 4 in terms of killing off this version of Loki after all of his change, realized who he is, turned into a more heroic person, and realized who he is, realized that he doesn't want to rule, he just understands himself more, and then getting killed. That moment was so shocking, and if that left me with that for a week, I don't think I could breathe for the rest of that week. But showing that end credit scene, now I understand adds something to those viewers, but again, it felt a little bit like how WandaVision sort of felt like it was dumbing it down for the audience, or not letting the audience really feel the emotion from each week of each episode. But Loki was far better than the other two shows in that aspect, because it did have the shocks and surprises and did keep them there, and was very original in its story. I enjoyed the sitcom aspect of WandaVision a lot, but I didn't really enjoy the classical MCU stuff. It didn't fit with the tone of that show, and Falcon Winter Soldier to me was more consistent, but was sort of messy plot and character-wise. Loki was consistent across the board and knew exactly what it was. It was a fantasy sci-fi character piece, and episode 4 was incredible. That scene with the timekeepers realizing they're fake, and Loki and Sylvie teaming up at that moment, I got extreme Star Wars Episode 8 The Last Jedi vibes out of that. If you look at the throne room scene from The Last Jedi with Rey and Kylo Ren, it reminded me very similar of not only the relationship between Loki and Sylvie, but also that scene. And then episode 5 to me was just a really wacky adventure, even more world building. Richard E. Grant as classic Loki, perfect casting choice. This episode was really intense, and again, visually stunning. The visuals in this show, not only the CG, but the way it's shot, the dizzying visual effects, the movements of shots, the way they turn upside down. Everything about this show on a technical craft, from the production design, the incredible score, the music choices, which were really, really well placed. Everything about this show on a technical level is probably the best of the MCU I've ever seen. These shows have been much more technically apprehensive and creative than any of the other MCU movies, and I'm really loving it. On a story level and on a character level, it's also top tier MCU. The last episode, originally, I actually had a lot of problems with, but until we saw the season 2 banner, because I was very disappointed with this episode, originally the final episode of the show, because as a finale to a what I thought was a mini series, it sucked. Non questions were answered in an exposition heavy way, and it ended on a massive cliffhanger that I thought was going to be resolved in another MCU property. But knowing that that's only a conclusion to a season 1, and that we do have season 2 coming at some point, makes me extremely excited. So because this show's finale didn't really have the same issues I had with the finales of Falcon Winter Soldier and WandaVision, I actually enjoyed Loki a lot more than those two shows, because there will be more. There is season 2, there's still mysteries to unfold. It leaves it on a huge, baffling cliffhanger with Kang the Conqueror, which is interesting. Again, like every other episode of this show, every single episode of Loki made me go, what the hell is going to happen next? Out of every episode, there was a sense of uncertainty, a sense of, I have no clue where this is going to go. The unpredictability was all over this thing, and it sort of matches the unpredictability of the choices of the Loki character. And I loved how it explored more of that character's mindset and how it's changing because of this. Loki, to me, was just flat out amazing. I loved every episode, and even though the finale was still my least favorite episode. The finale of Loki was still my least favorite episode of the bunch. I would say episode 4, just because of how emotional and how intense it was probably my favorite, and I really loved the first 3 as well. Episode 5 was a lot of fun. But episode 4 is my favorite, episode 6 was my least favorite, but I still liked the direction the show was going in every step of the way. It looked visually gorgeous and everything, so I liked every step that this show took to develop this character and its story and build the mysteries, and even though I was expecting a conclusion when it came to the end, I knew that that probably wasn't the best, and I was a bit worried that it was going to conclude everything too quickly, and it didn't. It left everything open and ended on a huge cliffhanger, so I have no clue where it's going to go, and I'm very excited to see where Loki is going to go in the future and what future possibilities it could lead to the MCU, because this is all happening in 2012, not in present day MCU, so it's all happening in different timelines, so I have no clue what they're going to do. This is my favorite of the 3 MCU shows that they've done so far, and mainly it's because of this character piece it does for the Loki character, and the really innovative and clever story they put around him, and its dazzling direction. I thought Loki was really great, and besides a few issues I had with the finale and like a few tiny things throughout the show, there's really not much I have to complain about. I loved watching every episode, and there's a level of uncertainty in it that I loved, and a point where I didn't know what was going to happen the next episode. I couldn't predict what would happen. It left me in a way where I had no clue where the story could go, and I thought that was really interesting. I liked the deeper themes it explored, and I liked the time travel est of it. I liked seeing all these different variants and versions of the Loki character, and yeah, I really, really enjoyed Loki, and it definitely brought this character his glorious purpose. So all that considered, I'm going to give Loki Season 1 an A. I'm also going to give this show around a 93% so far. I really, really loved it, and I had a great time with it, and I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to say in the comments down below about this show as well. And of course, thanks for watching, and goodbye.
Please sign to verify this is everything you've ever said.
This is absurd.
Sign this too.